Hello, this is Sophie Lawson from SophieLawson.com, and this is episode. What's this? This is episode 214 of the Sophie Art Podcast, which is a little podcast that I do about the art and things, and this one is an About The Tings episode. It's a walk and talk, and I'm going to talk about rejection, because I've started noticing something. I'm starting to notice that a lot of my actions are actually the result of a fear of rejection, and I feel like I've backtracked through my life to see where it's come from. So I'm going to talk about some things to do with rejection and things. I'm not sure where this one's going to go, but hopefully it'll be fun. This is more like a sort of a brain dump, really. But last night I had art class, and I've decided what I'm going to do is the last podcast of each month, or maybe the first one of each month, but one each month we'll be looking at the past month's stuff at art class, because last night we did a still life, so there's lots of different things to talk about, really, which I think would be quite cool. If you watch, you can see this one as a video if you want. I'm just getting into the park, and there's a bunch of, I'm going to get run over in a minute. There's a pair of shopping trolleys. The amount of shopping trolleys that I see around here. Hey, I might go and sit on the swings in a minute. Yeah, I am. I'm going to go sit on the swings. When was the last time you sat on the swings? Swings are cool. So, what are we doing with this one then? Well, lilDENNiS is at home. He doesn't like coming out very much lately. Oh, it's all spongy, this floor is. So this is what we call, this podcast is a talk and swing. A swing-da-ding. When me and my sister, what we used to do when we went on the swings was we used to go like that, and then you jumped off at the end. It was cool. Oh yeah, all the trees are starting to get their leaves now. Everything's looking beautiful, which is nice. So what have I got to say about rejection? Cherry blossom trees are nice as well. I like the way the things fall from the sky. I hope it's not too noisy in here. I didn't realise how noisy this park was. So what's happened to me is, for a large part of the last I would say definitely the last 5 years, I've kept thinking to myself, all of my issues are based around a lack of self-worth. But I'm starting to realise that it's not actually that. It's more to do with rejection. So I've been watching a lot of videos from Divine Truth, and on that what he's talking about on there is, and I'll put a link in the description. Oh, before we get into it, I've got to say something. Last night I watched a film on YouTube called Virtual Nightmare 2000. I definitely recommend watching it. The whole film is on YouTube, and it's basically kind of like The Matrix. It's a little bit rough around the edges because it's a film made for TV, but it's really cool. So I'd like to talk about things, but you can't really talk about it without spoiling it. But if you're into like sort of, life, everything being an illusion and things like that, it's because right from the start you realise that's what's happening. Because this bloke, what happens is this bloke he's involved in a car crash, and then he like wakes up in his bed, and all of a sudden reality starts to not be what it used to be. He's seeing through the illusion. It's cool, it is. So again, I'll put a link in the description for that as well. It's called Virtual Nightmare 2000. But this divine truth, what he was saying was, he's been talking about things which, he's been talking about a lot of stuff which has made sense to me. And one of the things he said which I hadn't really thought about before is emotions are like layered. So there's certain emotions which are like almost like pretend emotions that your mind makes you think is the real emotion, so that you almost get sort of stuck trying to resolve the wrong emotion. So like anger is one of the top level emotions, which is what he says is anger really, you need to go into anger and you'll realise that anger is on top of another emotion. So self-worth is on top of other emotions. So because for me, like, there's things like, well, when I was at my old job, this was about 8 years ago now. This was before I started drawing or anything. What would happen for me is I'd go into work, and if I saw someone and it was just me, so if I walked down a corridor and it was just me and this other person, I would always say hello to them. If I walked down a corridor and it was me and that person, and there was, say, another person, I feel like now it's got to about 4 people, but if there was more than like one person there, what would happen is I wouldn't be able to say hello, because I would be scared that I thought to myself, what if I say hello to that person and they don't say hello back, and then I look stupid in front of the other person? Now what happens there is, what that is it's a fear of rejection. I always thought it was a lack of self-worth, that I didn't feel worthy enough to say hello and stuff. But it's actually a fear of rejection. And what's happened is, this is what I notice now. You've got this fear of rejection, so you end up basically rejecting other people, which means they will then end up rejecting you. So you end up creating the thing you're scared of. How mad is that? So what's happened for me is I've gotten a lot better, because probably about 5 or 6 years ago I started to realise that that's what was happening. I started to realise that all I had to do was say hello. So I've gotten a lot better, and if I'm with about, say, 3 or 4 people, I can say hello to somebody in front of about three people, I reckon. If it gets more than that, something inside of me says, it sort of stops me. So what I've got to do is I've got to start saying hello, no matter how many people are there. Because what I do is I put myself in the other person's shoes, and I think, well, imagine if I didn't have this issue, so I could say hello to anyone no matter how many people were there. You would think, if let's say I'm called Dave, and then you got Sophie. So Dave goes into work, and Sophie normally says hello. And then one day there's like 4 people there. Dave goes into work, so I go into work, and Sophie doesn't say hello. Dave is going to think, why didn't Sophie say hello? So he's going to feel a little bit of rejection. But the only reason is because Sophie was scared of getting rejected, so she ended up rejecting Dave. So what happens now is, next time, like the next day or something, Dave might think to himself, well, you didn't say hello to me yesterday, so I'm not going to say hello to you. So now what's happened is, the next day, Dave's now rejecting you, but he's only rejecting you because you rejected him. And this is like, everything seems to be like this. It's crazy. Now this one I'm noticing that this rejection is linked to so many things. Interviewing guests on the podcast, there's a fear of rejection. Speaking in groups, there's a fear of rejection. Pretty much everything that I'm scared of, I feel like it's linked to a fear of rejection. So this is a big one to sort of work out. So what I did was I started thinking, where did this fear of rejection come from? Now there's a couple things that I've noticed, I've thought of so far. The first one is, when I transitioned into Sophie, my dad basically did sort of reject me. So that's the first one. But the thing with that is that was only in about 2015, and I'd already been living with a fear of rejection before that. So I thought, well, it can't be that. But I'm sure that didn't help, maybe. But what I've pushed it back to is in 1993, when I got strangled. What happened was, and I don't blame nobody for this, because I've processed the strangling. So what happened was, a few years ago, I put myself into a lucid dream, and I relived being strangled, and I thought I had relived it fully, and I think I did, but I'm not sure anymore, because this fear of rejection is coming from that incident. So I've noticed that incident of being strangled was actually two sort of almost like two incidents in one. There was the initial getting strangled, which I believe created social anxiety and panic attacks. Well, it certainly increased, because I've thought back to my childhood, and what happened to me, I was like a different person before and after that incident. So after that incident is definitely when all of the panic attacks started happening. So I'd go to school and I would be covered in sweat all the time. And then because I was covered in sweat, I'd be anxious about sweating, which meant that I was sweating because I was anxious about sweating. So now, because I'm sweating even more, I'm getting more anxious. Again, it's the same thing. You've got a fear of rejection, so you start rejecting people, which means they're going to reject you. You've got a fear of sweating, which means you're going to sweat, which makes you have an even more fear. So, this is how amazing the mind is the mind, because this is all negative stuff, but what I'm saying is, I'm thinking you can actually use this potential of the mind to sort of create reality in a positive way. But it needs like an awareness. Because if you don't do nothing, what I'm thinking is, your fear seems to take hold. It's almost like fear is the default state for some reason. So then fear will create reality. So the reality that I'll end up in is a fear one. So if you can actually spin it around, which again, it's like that thing I talk about a lot, which the negative shapes of the hand. If you focus on the fingers, you see the fingers. If you focus on the space between the fingers, you see like the negative shapes. And if you draw the negative shapes, you end up drawing the hand. But there's a point where you can actually, the edge of your finger, you can put your awareness on the edge and look either side of it, a bit like that illusion. There's this little image it's a black and white image, and in the middle is like a vase, and on the outside is two faces looking at each other. And if you look at the two faces, you see two faces, and you almost can't see the vase. If you look at the vase, you can't see the faces, but they're both in there together. So I'm feeling like the mind is the same thing. So what happens is, it's almost as if, let's say the default state is the vase, you have to sort of put a bit of effort in to see the faces. But then once you've seen the faces, you can never not see the faces. And it gets to a point where you can sort of flip between the two at the same time. So what was I talking about then? The rejection thing. Something about... Well, I thought I had fully processed that strangling incident. But what happened was, so I thought to myself, where did this rejection come from? So what happened was, after that incident, yeah, and I don't blame nobody, I don't blame my mum or nothing. I don't blame nothing, because, again, what I've done is, as well, I've processed what these other people have been through as well. And you start realising that, like, let's say, for instance, your mum has been living with the same sort of thing of fear controlling. And so it's this thing that goes backwards through time. At some point, somebody, and it might even be like Adam and Eve, it might go back that far, but at some point, somebody let some fear in, and all the children that they had, they adopted this fear thing. So this is why it's quite hard to change, because it's going back so far. So like, I've got 30 odd years of, well, what is it, 1993, so that's 30 years worth of, I've got 30 years worth of, well, 29 years worth of living in a fear of rejection. So to suddenly change that, it's going to take a bit of time. So what happened was, when I got strangled, that's the first incident which created the social anxiety and panic attacks. But the second incident was when, well, what happened? There's two parts to it as well, which this creates another thing, which is guilt. So I've got a fear of rejection, and I've got a constant sensation of guilt, especially around my mum. And me and my mum are both openly talking about all of this, which is really cool, because there was a time in the past when, well, I wouldn't have been able to have talked about this, and my mum definitely would not have been able to talk about it, but now we can talk about it, because we both know that we're both sort of, I was going to say we're both to blame, but we're also not to blame. It's, in a way, it's not our fault, really. So what happens is, when this fear of rejection came into me, this belief in a fear of rejection, you could say that was, let's say, that could be Mum's fault in a way, but that was only because Mum herself had a fear of rejection herself, which that goes back to somebody else. But the thing is, I said this before somewhere, it's me that's keeping this fear of rejection going. So therefore I'm the only one who can actually put an end to it. And because me and my mum are linked to this one incident, if I can heal it, I'm going to heal my mum as well. And if my mum heals it, she's going to heal me as well. Or at least we'll help each other heal it. So what happened was, I got strangled, I fell to the floor, and the bloke who did it to me was my mum's boyfriend at the time. And, well, I later learnt that he was also beating up the dog and stuff. And what I said to me was, he was actually an abusive person. So it wasn't just me. Because for the longest time I thought it was me. The biggest healing I got from that lucid dream was, I woke up from it crying, saying I didn't do anything wrong. Because I had blamed myself for that. For all those years I blamed myself. So that I did heal something in that lucid dream. But I never tackled the rejection bit. So what happened was, when I fell to the floor, the bloke who strangled me ran out the door, and my mum ran after him instead of coming to me. And I look at that now, and I feel like that's what triggered the rejection. Because what's obviously happened there is, I'm only 13 years old, and my mum has run off. Mum's basically left me. You could say left me for dead. She's basically left me for dead, and you could say she's rejected me for this other bloke. So that's where the rejection come from. The feeling of guilt came from when they came back. Me mum made me say sorry to her boyfriend, and all I was doing was I was trying to get the phone off him, because he had just snatched the phone off my mum. So I basically tried to snatch the phone off him to give it back to my mum, because she wanted to ring my nan. So I'd done nothing wrong. And then when she made me say sorry, I've obviously in my head it said, right, you did something wrong there. So I now felt guilty, and I feel like the reason I feel guilty with my mum is because what happened is, after that incident, I left the house and I moved in with my dad. And so I feel like maybe part of me feels like I abandoned my mum in that moment and left her on her own. So I'm starting to work out that one incident really created a lot of my limiting beliefs. But the thing that's always confused it is, from a very young age, from as young as I can remember, I was dealing with this issues of being transgender. So that really muddled the waters. Because I always thought to myself, well, is this social anxiety and panic attacks, is it coming because I'm just hitting puberty? My body's starting to go all hairy and like a male, but I feel like a female. So that's what's confused everything. But the good thing is, when I transitioned, I realised that I still had a lot of these things. So that's when I knew it wasn't just that. But again, I don't think it's as simple as that one thing doing it. I think it's a bunch of moments that do things, but there are these key points which create like things. And there's another one. When I was 4, I was circumcised, and I always remember when I was at like PE class or something in the boys' changing room, and we was all having like a shower or something, I would never go in the shower because I always felt like I was odd. I always felt like I was like the odd one out, because everyone else, I thought nobody else was circumcised, and I thought they'd all look at me and think, because back then you used to go in the showers like after rugby or something, after football and things, and like there was this big long row of showers and everyone was naked and things. I used to hate that. I really did. I used to really hate that. And that would have been before I was 13. So again, I'm trying to work out where all these things are coming from. It's quite interesting, eh? But it's amazing how what I'm starting to notice is little things every single day, little things I'm doing which are fear-based. I can actually see that they're due to a lack of rejection, a fear of rejection. Like I might walk into a shop or something and I'll get anxious about saying hello to the shop assistant because I'm scared that what if I say hello and they don't say hello back? It's complicated, but it's simple at the same time, in a strange way. So I do wonder whether it's going to be one of these things that once you've really worked it out, I wonder whether what will happen is it's almost like overnight you'll be free from it all. Or is it going to be a long process? I'm not sure. But one of the things I know for sure is you can't have a fear of rejection as an artist, because being an artist, like one of the main things about it is being okay with rejection. Like you hear these stories about people who like sent off thousands of invitations or something or thousands of things to editors or something, and they only got like one reply. So rejection is a part of life, really. And then the other thing is, so I got this fear of rejection about simple little things like just saying hello to someone. But then the other thing is, what does it matter even if they say, what does it matter even if they don't say hello? Because I've thought about that as well, and you realise it doesn't matter anyway. So you've got this fear about something that doesn't even matter anyway. It's really weird. Then the other thing is, what I'm doing as well is I could be creating a load of people with a fear of rejection. Because if I'm acting in a fear of rejection, so I start rejecting people, that other person now might sort of suddenly start having a fear of rejection. So can you see how it's a fear can spread like a virus? But I'm pretty convinced that you could look at love almost as like a positive virus. So if you live in love, that will also spread. So it's quite cool. I feel like that's it for that really. Is there anything else? No, I don't think so. It's nice to see the trees. It's nice to see green trees. It's been quite a while. It's quite a nice day as well today. So that's it. So I was going to do something today. I was going to have a podcast about answering questions or something. So I definitely want to do a podcast soon, answering questions and things. So what I'm probably going to do is, well, if you've got any questions you'd like me to, or just, any questions to talk about on the podcast, it could be anything. It could be anything to do with art, anything to do with spiritual things, anything to do with the mind, anything to do with illusions, anything to do with like inspirational art books or something, art class. It could be about transitioning, personal things, anything. And what I'll do is I'll put them all together, and then hopefully this month, we're in May. I'll try to do it this month. And also I'm definitely going to get that art book articles finished. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, instead of doing one of those, because I started doing this thing about articles, about the fundamentals of art fundamentals, and I got to the first one, and I think there's 5 or 6, and I was going to do one every other week. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the remaining ones all in one video, but I'll try and do each of the fundamentals almost like 10 minutes for each fundamental. So I'll try and sort of compress it all into the main highlights from the article, really. So I want to get that done this month as well, because it's been bothering me that I haven't done it. So that's it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. This week's inspirational quote, it was actually, I think this is it. So this was left on one of my videos. I think it was last week's podcast actually, on the video of it. And somebody said, they quoted somebody else, and I think the quote was, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself." Now, that's what it's all about, isn't it? There's nothing to fear but fear itself. I wonder if this gate's going to make a noise.